The fur coat. It was a cold winter that year. People shrank up in the chill and grew smaller, all except those who had furs. Judge Reinhardt had a big fur coat. It almost belonged, moreover, to his official position, for he was managing director of a brand new company. His old friend, Dr. Henk, on the contrary, had no fur coat. He had instead a pretty wife and 3 children. Dr. Henk was thin and pale. Some people grow fat with marriage. Others grow thin. Dr. Henk had grown thin and remained so on this particular Christmas Eve. "I've had a bad year this year," said Dr. Henk to himself, as he was on his way to his old friend John Richard to borrow money. It was 3 o'clock of Christmas Eve, just the hour of the midday twilight. "I've had a very bad year. My health is fragile, not to say broken. My patients, on the contrary, have picked up, almost a whole lot of them. I see them so seldom nowadays. Presumably, I'm going to die soon. My wife thinks so too. I've seen it in her looks. In such a case, it would be desirable that the event should happen before the end of January, when the cursed life insurance premium has to be paid." By the time he had reached this point in the process of his thoughts, he found himself on the corner of Government and Harbour Street. As he was about to pass the street crossing in order to proceed down Government Street, he slipped on a smooth sleigh track and fell, and at the same moment, a sleigh drove up at full speed. The driver swore, and the horse instinctively turned aside, but Dr. Henk received a blow on the shoulder from one of the runners, and furthermore, a screw or nail or some similar projection caught his overcoat, tore a big rent in it. People gathered around him. A policeman helped him to his feet. A young girl brushed the snow off him. An old woman gesticulated over his torn overcoat in a way that indicated she would have liked to sew it up on the spot if she could. And a prince of the royal house, who happened to be going by, picked up his cap and set it on his head. So everything was all right again, except the coat. "Lord, what a sight you are, Gustav," said Judge Richard, when Henk came up to his office. "Yes, I've been run over," answered Henk. "That's just like you," said Richard, laughing good-humouredly. "But you can't go home like that. You may gladly have the loan of my fur coat, and I'll send a boy home after my ulster." "Thanks," said Dr. Henk, and after he had borrowed the 100 kroner he needed, he added, "We shall be glad to have you for dinner." Richard was a bachelor, and was accustomed to spend Christmas Eve with Henk. On the way home, Henk was in a better humour than he had been for a long time. "That's on account of the fur coat," he said to himself. "I should have got myself a fur coat on credit long ago. It would have strengthened my self-esteem and raised me in the popular opinion. One can't pay such a small fee to a doctor in a fur coat as to a doctor in an ordinary overcoat with worn buttonholes. It's a bother that I didn't happen to think of that before. Now it's too late." He walked a stretch through King's Garden. It was dark already. It had begun to snow again, and the acquaintances he met did not recognize him. "Who knows, though, whether it's too late?" Henk went on to himself. "I'm not old yet, and I may have been mistaken about the question of my health. I'm poor as a little fox in the woods. But so was John Richard, not so long since. My wife has grown cold and unfriendly toward me in these latter times. She would surely begin to love me afresh if I could earn more money, and if I were dressed in furs. It has seemed to me that she cared more for John since he got himself a fur coat than she did before. She was certainly a bit sweet on him when she was a young girl too, but he never courted her. On the contrary, he said to her, and to everybody, that he wouldn't dare to marry on less than 10,000 a year. But I dared. And Ellen was a poor girl who wanted to marry. I don't believe she was so much in love with me that I should have been able to seduce her if I had wished to. But I didn't want to either. How could I have dreamed of that sort of love? I haven't thought of that since I was 16 and saw Faust the first time at the opera with Arnoldson. I'm sure, though, she was fond of me when we were first married. One can't be mistaken about such a thing as that. Why couldn't she be again? In the first days of our marriage, she always said spiteful things to John whenever they met. But then he built up a company, invited us often to the theatre, and got himself a fur coat. So naturally, in time, my wife grew tired of saying spiteful things to him. Henk still had several errands to do before dinner. It was already 5:30 when he came home, laden with parcels. He felt very tender in his left shoulder. Otherwise, there was nothing that reminded him of his mishap in the afternoon. Except the fur coat. "It'll be fun to see what my wife will do when she sees me in a fur coat," said Dr. Henk to himself. The hall was quite dark. The lamp was never lighted unless visitors were expected. "I hear her in the parlor now," thought Dr. Henk. "She walks as lightly as a little bird. It's remarkable that I still get warm around the heart every time I hear her step in the next room." Dr. Henk was right in his supposition that his wife would give him a more loving reception when he had on a fur coat than she was otherwise wont to do. She stole up close to him in the darkest corner of the hall, twined her arms around his neck and kissed him warmly and intensively. Then she burrowed her head into the collar of his fur coat and whispered, "Gustav isn't home yet?" "Yes," answered Dr. Henk in a voice that trembled slightly while he caressed her hair with both hands. "Yes, he's home." A big fire flamed in Dr. Henk's workroom. Whiskey and water stood on the table. Judge Richard lay stretched out in a large leather easy chair and smoked a cigar. Dr. Henk sat huddled in a corner of the sofa. The door was open on the hall where Mrs. Henk and the children were busy lighting the Christmas tree. Dinner had been very quiet. Only the children had twittered and prattled to one another and been happy. "You're not saying anything, old fellow," said Richard. "Is it that you're sitting worrying over your torn overcoat?" "No," answered Henk. "It's rather over the fur coat." There was a few minutes' silence before he continued. "I'm thinking of something else, too. I'm sitting thinking that this is the last Christmas we shall celebrate together. I'm a doctor, and I know I've not many days left. I know it now, with full certainty. I want, therefore, to thank you for all the kindness you've shown me and my wife in these last times." "Oh, you're mistaken," muttered Richard, looking away. "No," replied Henk, "I'm not mistaken. And I want also to thank you for lending me your fur coat. It has given me the last seconds of happiness I have known in my life."